Hey, what's up YouTube? Dan the Fix-It Man. Got another quick video here for you. I'm going to show you how to change your front brake pads on a 2010 Acura TL. You can see our brake pad material is worn down. Now what we need to do in order to make room for the new pads, which are going to be a lot thicker and have more material, we're going to have to push the caliper pistons back inside the caliper. And there's several ways to do that. You could pull this off and use a caliper compression tool. You could use a C-clamp, or the method I like to use is just a flathead screwdriver or a small pry bar. You just wedge it in here and you pull that towards you. You can see that there's two little openings here, and what that will do is allow you to pry those caliper pistons back in. Now before we push the caliper pistons back in, we need to make sure that we've got enough room in our master cylinder reservoir for that brake fluid. The brake fluid that's going to come backwards through the system, we just need to make sure that it's not going to overflow and make a big mess. But it's underneath this cover. You can see right here it says brake fluid. One of the clips is missing, and this one is actually not in a little channel, but we'll fix that. But for right now, let's just pop all these clips off. Sometimes the brake, because they get real brittle when they get hot under the engine bay here. But that's what they look like. We can just pull this cover off. All right, and this is our brake fluid reservoir. So you can see the fluid level is way down here, close to this seam, but the max line is all the way up here. Quite a bit of room inside there to be able to push that caliper piston back in, which is going to bring that fluid level up. Now, of course, we'll check that once we're done and make sure that it's at the proper level. Now, a lot of people ask me if you need to remove this cap in order to push the caliper piston back in, and you really don't. Any air that's in here will still be able to escape, but what we don't want to do is open this cap and expose the brake fluid to new air, which the brake fluid absorbs moisture, even moisture in the air. It's hygroscopic, and that causes it to degrade and go bad. So the less you can expose brake fluid to the air, the better. So I usually just leave the cap on while doing this. But since we know we have room, let's go ahead and push the caliper pistons back in. So now I usually just grab a couple screwdrivers and put them in these openings. Basically, you're wedging in between this edge of the rotor and the edge of the caliper. Sometimes you just need to see what edge you can find. You can also use a small pry bar for this. There we go. Once you get it to move a little bit, you might be able to wedge the screwdriver in between the pad and the rotor, and that's what I've done here. And then just some steady pressure. Okay, that should be enough. You can see now the caliper will slide on the slide pins. You see how much more room we have now in there. Okay, now we need to loosen and remove these two caliper slide pin bolts, and those are a 17 millimeter. Okay, now we're just going to pull the caliper off, and I've got these little caliper hooks. We can just hang this up out of the way. You just don't want to let that dangle by the brake line if you can avoid it. And we can pull out the old pads. This one was maybe just starting to scratch on that little wear indicator there. You can see how it's kind of shiny. And then we can pull out this little clip right here. These are abutment clips or pad retainers. Sometimes kits won't come with new ones, and if you're in a bind, you know, you can try to clean these up and reuse them, but I recommend that you do replace them every time. Luckily, our kit comes with new ones. Now, in this case, we're not going to be changing out the rotors. We've just been asked to change the pads this time. The rotors aren't in terrible shape. They're not warped or anything. And of course, we didn't go metal to metal, so they're not all scored up. We could take them off and resurface them, but they've just asked us to quickly change the pads so they can get back on the road, and that's just fine. That's what we're going to do today. Now, if you do plan on changing out the rotors, just note that you'll just have to take off these two bolts here in the back. Those are, I believe, a 19 millimeter. And when you get over here, the rotor has a couple of these screws. Those are a JIS 3. I recommend you pick this up here. This is a vessel. It's a JIS 3 size, and this is an impact screwdriver. The way this works, you basically just put that in to that screw, and then you hit it on this end with a hammer, you know, while holding the shaft steady, and it actually will twist, and that will loosen those, and I've been able to take those out without stripping them. If you try it with a regular Phillips screwdriver, like a number 3 Phillips screwdriver, it might work, but a lot of times it will strip and you'll end up having to drill those out. But in our case, like I said, we're just doing pads, so this will be a lot easier. Before I put those new abutment clips back on this bracket here, I'm going to go ahead and clean that up with a wire wheel like this right here, and just make sure that you wear some safety goggles if you are going to do this. You could also just use a wire brush, but this seems to do the trick pretty quick. really just trying to avoid some corrosion or rust building up underneath, and that's what they call rust jacking, where it would actually lift this up and bind the pads. And so we just need to make sure that that's clean. I've noticed quite a few people, especially in rusty areas, where they're actually putting some grease on that. So we're going to go ahead and do the same. Just a real small amount, just to get a little bit of a coating on there. Spread this around on each one. Just make sure that you don't touch the rotor with this. Not so much a lubricant, but just to protect that, prevent rust or corrosion that would cause that to bind. Now, it's also a good idea to put just a little coating underneath where those pads are going to slide. You don't want too much though, because a lot of that grease can cause the dust to stick there. But these just snap into place pretty easily. There we go. Same with this one here. I'm just doing a little thin coating on that little channel where the pads are going to ride, and it's easier to do when it's off. A lot of times I forget and I'll try to do it while it's on and I accidentally hit the rotor, but if you do get grease on the rotor or on the brake pad material, you know, the friction surface material, you can always just clean that off too. There we go. Okay, now we can put our new brake pad on. I'm also going to put a little bit of that grease on the back of this brake pad shim. We're not using too much here, just a real thin layer, and that really seems to dampen some of the vibration and noise that's transmitted through, you know, from the rotor to the pad to the caliper. It just seems to kind of keep things quiet. So I just do a real thin coating where it's going to make contact on those caliper pistons, and that will seem to keep it pretty quiet. And those just kind of pop in place like that. Same with the outside one. Almost out of grease here. Just a thin layer there. And a little bit at these ends. I already put some in those channels, so I really don't need too much. And then just line that up. That looks perfect. Now, before we put the caliper back on, we're also going to pull these caliper slide pins out and clean and re-grease them. This one actually feels pretty stiff. Sometimes I'll just spin them to test them. Oh yeah, and that's really, really dirty. That's kind of sticky, so we do need to clean that off. And we'll put some new grease on there. I'm almost out of that Sil Glide, so I'm going to use a different caliper grease that I've got. Sometimes I'll put these in a couple more times and try to pull out some more of that old grease. Another thing that I've done is just kind of fold a paper towel, or you know, whatever you got, a rag or something, and just kind of twist it. And sometimes I'll put that in and see how far we can get that to go inside and wipe out that old grease. There's little brushes and stuff like that too that you can use for this. See, that works pretty well. Gets a lot of that old grease out. And this is the other grease I'm going to use here. It's caliper grease. Just get that all over the slide pin here. Just kind of spin that as it goes in. And then see the boot just kind of pops up on it. Now you can see how this one keeps pushing out. There, I just burped out some of the air. So sometimes you need to pull this in and squeeze the boot. And we just did that, and then the air popped out. It's almost like burping it. And yeah, see, that just feels so much better now. Spins freely and slides freely like it should. We'll do the same with the bottom one here. Yeah, see, real stiff right now on this one. And that'll cause your brakes to drag. Real sticky, dirty grease there. If you use the wrong kind of grease here, like a petroleum-based grease, that will get hot and it will just stick and gum up. Just try the same method here of just a twisted up paper towel. You can kind of feel it bottom out when it does. And just pull that out. And you can see we got most of that old grease out of there. Seems to work pretty well. And same thing, we'll coat this guy. You want to double check these slide pins too. I should have showed you, but I cleaned this and it looked good. But sometimes they get pitted. If they're pitted really bad, you'll need to replace them. Same thing, just kind of squeeze that boot, pops the air out, and that's a huge improvement now. That's spinning freely and moves really easy like it should. And it's not pushing out. Again, you don't want that because that will cause your caliper to bind up. All right, now we can put the caliper back on. Just carefully line that up, put that into place. The slide pin has a little flat spot there, and that does need to line up. And that's what prevents that from spinning when you're tightening those bolts. And we can just get those back in place. Sometimes I put Loctite on these, but since this didn't have it, we're not going to do that. Some manufacturers use Loctite on these. Sometimes they only use them on the main caliper support bracket. Let's get those snug. That's pretty much everything, but it is very important that before you drive away that you step on the brake pedal several times until it feels firm. And what that will do, you can see we still have a little bit of space in there. That's going to push the caliper pistons back out, pressing the pads up against the rotor where they need to be. Now when you're doing this, don't press the brake pedal all the way to the floor. That can damage the seals in the master cylinder. Just press it about halfway down several times until it feels firm, and just remember to double check the fluid level in your master cylinder before you head out as well. I hope you liked the video. Please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you don't mind. That does help me out. I'll get a link in the description to some of the parts and tools used in the video as well. Thanks so much for watching, and good luck.